It's a hell of a thing killing a man. You take away all he's got and all he's ever gonna have. Unforgiven wasn't just another Western. It was a requiem, a brutal dismantling of Hollywood's most romanticized genre. Behind the weathered faces and dusty shootouts lurked chaos, an Oscar-winning actor nearly walking away, a director holding onto a script for over a decade, and production choices that defied every studio instinct. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 15 weird facts about Unforgiven, the secrets, the risks, and the raw battles that made this film unforgettable. Stick around for the bonus fact. It reveals a secret about Eastwood's script vault that could change how you see his entire career. Let's dive in. The script sat in Clint Eastwood's drawer for over a decade. Long before cameras rolled, the script for Unforgiven gathered dust in Clint Eastwood's desk. Screenwriter David Webb Peoples had written it in the early 1980s, originally titled The Cut-Whore Killings. Eastwood bought the rights but refused to make it immediately. Why? He wanted to age into the role. Eastwood sensed the story wasn't about a young gunslinger, but about a man staring down his own mortality. For nearly 10 years, he held the script, occasionally revisiting it but never pulling the trigger. By the early 1990s, he was 62, gray, weathered, and finally the perfect William Money. What audiences didn't realize was that timing wasn't accidental. Eastwood deliberately waited, knowing his own face, lined with years of hard living, would tell the story better than any makeup. The delay transformed what could have been just another gritty Western into an elegy about time, aging, and regret. It wasn't procrastination, it was patience, and it paid off in gold. Gene Hackman tried to quit the film. Gene Hackman nearly wasn't Little Bill Daggett. In fact, Hackman originally turned the part down. Why? He hated the violence. Hackman, by the early 90s, had grown disillusioned with films that glorified brutality. When Eastwood pitched him Unforgiven, Hackman bristled at the script's harshness. He even told his daughters he didn't want to contribute to such ugly violence. But Eastwood, with his trademark calm, convinced him otherwise. He reframed the movie not as a celebration of violence, but as an unflinching critique. Hackman reluctantly agreed. Ironically, the role he nearly abandoned would win him an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. What audiences saw was a sheriff maintaining order. What Hackman brought was reluctant menace, a man cruel not because the script told him to be, but because Hackman finally surrendered to the story's bleak honesty. The film needed his hesitance. Without it, Little Bill would have been a caricature. With it, he became terrifyingly human. The shootout was filmed without traditional Western glamour. Westerns are famous for stylized gunfights, dusty streets, slow draws, dramatic music, but Eastwood refused that formula. In Unforgiven, the climactic shootout in Greeley's saloon was stripped bare. No music, no glamour, just chaos and gunfire. Eastwood insisted it be filmed in near silence, save for the gunshots, boots, and screams. He told his crew, "Guns are loud, messy, and ugly. That's how we'll show it." The scene was rehearsed meticulously, with actors firing blanks that echoed violently in the enclosed set. The result was brutal realism. Characters fumbled, shots missed, and men died awkwardly, not heroically. Cinematographer Jack Green avoided stylish framing, keeping the camera steady, almost clinical. The effect was chilling. Viewers felt like witnesses, not spectators. It wasn't cinematic bravado, it was murder. That choice shattered the romantic myth of the noble Western duel and delivered a gut-punch audiences never forgot. Richard Harris was nearly replaced after on-set clashes. Richard Harris, playing English Bob, brought elegance and danger to his role, but not without friction. Harris, notorious for being mercurial, clashed with Eastwood's minimalist directing style. Eastwood rarely yelled, "Cut." Instead, he let takes run long, forcing actors into raw, unscripted moments. Harris hated it. He demanded structure, precision, and control. At one point, tempers flared so badly, producers considered replacing him. But Eastwood intervened. Instead of disciplining Harris, he simply adjusted the schedule, giving the actor fewer takes but more time between them. Strangely, this compromise worked. Harris delivered a performance full of swagger and arrogance, perfectly embodying English Bob's misplaced confidence. The tension between actor and director bled into the film itself, making Bob's brittle bravado all the more believable. It wasn't harmony that created greatness, it was friction, captured forever on celluloid. Eastwood banned play acting on set. Clint Eastwood had one rule: no overacting. He despised the theatrical gestures and dramatic flourishes typical of old Hollywood westerns. On Unforgiven, he drilled his cast into understatement. Eastwood often told actors, "Don't just act, be." During dailies, if he spotted exaggerated hand movements, unnecessary pauses, or what he called cowboy posing, he demanded retakes. The crew recalls him muttering, "That's play acting. Cut it out." This rule created a stark, subdued tone that made the violence even more shocking. Eastwood himself led by example, playing money with quiet restraint, hesitant, almost ashamed of the man he used to be. The contrast was devastating. When violence finally erupted, it wasn't heroic, it was horrifying. What audiences didn't know was that Eastwood's insistence on stripping away performance forced every actor to dig deeper, replacing bravado with truth. The result was a Western that felt less like cinema and more like history unfolding. The weather nearly shut down production. Filming. Unforgiven wasn't done in Hollywood. It was shot in Alberta, Canada, where the weather turned brutal. Cast and crew found themselves battling unpredictable conditions. Some days brought freezing winds that cut through costumes designed for dusty Western heat. Other days, sudden rains turned the carefully constructed set into mud. Clint Eastwood, notorious for shooting quickly and on budget, refused to let weather derail his pace. Instead, he worked around it. If the skies opened up, he shifted to interior shots. If the wind howled, he reblocked scenes to minimize disruption. For the actors, it meant grueling days. Horses slipped, extras shivered, and sound crews fought endlessly to capture clean audio. Yet Eastwood's calm command turned potential disaster into atmosphere. The cold bled into the film, lending Money's world a harsher, less romantic feel. Not the golden glow of Hollywood's past, but a cruel frontier that punished every soul daring to survive it. Morgan Freeman faced backlash for his role. Casting Morgan Freeman as Ned Logan was groundbreaking, but it wasn't without controversy. In the early 90s, Westerns rarely depicted black characters as equals to white gunslingers. Freeman's presence shattered that mold. He wasn't a sidekick, he wasn't comic relief. He was Money's partner, his equal, and ultimately his moral compass. Some critics hailed the move as bold, others bristled. Traditionalists argued it was revisionist, but Eastwood never flinched. He believed Freeman's gravitas elevated the story. Behind the scenes, Freeman handled the pressure with grace, but admitted later that he felt the weight of representation pressing down. The role wasn't just another job, it was a statement. When Ned's brutal fate unfolds, audiences didn't just watch a character die, they felt the raw wound of history. The controversy proved Unforgiven wasn't rewriting the past for comfort, it was confronting it unflinchingly with Freeman at its core. The town was built from scratch. Most Westerns rely on pre-existing sets, but not Unforgiven. Eastwood insisted on authenticity. Instead of recycling a Hollywood backlot, the production built the entire town of Big Whiskey from the ground up in Alberta. No facades, no hollow structures, real buildings with working interiors. The decision wasn't just aesthetic. Eastwood wanted actors to feel immersed. When Gene Hackman slammed a door, it rattled with weight. When Morgan Freeman leaned against a wall, it didn't wobble. The dusty streets were trampled into reality by horses and boots, creating texture the camera couldn't fake. The cost was higher, the logistics harder, but the payoff was undeniable. Audiences felt transported, not to a movie set, but to a living, breathing Western town. What few realized was that after filming wrapped, the town didn't just vanish. Parts of it remained, a ghostly relic of one of cinema's most haunting westerns. Eastwood's one-take philosophy changed the film's tone. Clint Eastwood's directing style was legendary for its speed. Unlike directors who demand dozens of takes, Eastwood preferred one or two. He believed spontaneity captured truth. On Unforgiven, this philosophy rattled some actors. Richard Harris, used to meticulous rehearsal, hated it. Others, like Hackman, thrived. The effect shaped the film's tone. Performances carried raw edges, pauses that weren't scripted, mistakes that stayed in. Eastwood often refused to call action, or cut, loudly. He whispered, allowing scenes to bleed naturally. Crew members recalled the eerie calm on set, punctuated only by gunfire or horses. This approach demanded total focus. Actors couldn't rely on repetition to refine. They had to live in the moment. The gamble worked. The authenticity of exhaustion, hesitation, and fear in Unforgiven wasn't rehearsed polish. It was real-time vulnerability etched into every frame. The studio tried to interfere. Eastwood said, Warner Brothers knew they had a Western, but they didn't fully grasp Eastwood's vision. Executives worried it was too bleak, too slow, too dark. They suggested more action, a quicker pace, even a romantic subplot. Eastwood refused. He had Final Cut written into his contract, and he wielded it with quiet authority. The story is the story, he told them. No compromises. The studio reluctantly backed off, but tensions simmered. Insiders whispered that if Unforgiven flopped, Eastwood's stubbornness would be blamed. Instead, his conviction paid off with Oscars and box office gold. The clash wasn't just about one film. It was about Eastwood proving that a director's uncompromised vision could still dominate in an era of corporate meddling. So go ahead and like and subscribe, because stories like this remind us some of the greatest films in history were saved not by compromise, but by defiance. The horses became unexpected divas. Westerns live and die by their horses, and Unforgiven was no exception. Clint Eastwood, a lifelong writer, demanded authenticity in how actors handled their mounts. But the horses had personalities of their own. Some were seasoned veterans used in countless productions, while others were skittish, uncooperative, and unpredictable. Richard Harris reportedly had a particularly difficult horse that refused to hit its marks, forcing extra takes and delaying shoots. Eastwood, instead of forcing the animals, adjusted blocking to accommodate them. He told actors, if the horse moves, you move with it. Don't fight it. The result was startling realism. Characters fumbled reins, adjusted saddles, and even cursed under their breath, just like real cowboys would. What audiences didn't know is that these unscripted struggles stayed in the final cut. The horses weren't just props. They were uncredited co-stars, adding grit and unpredictability to a world already teetering on chaos. The script was almost rewritten into a traditional Western. When Warner Brothers first reviewed David Webb Peoples' script, they pushed for heavy rewrites. Executives wanted more shootouts, a traditional love interest, and a heroic redemption arc for William Money. In short, they wanted another Dirty Harry on horseback. Peoples resisted, and Eastwood backed him up. Eastwood promised he'd film the script word for word, resisting Hollywood polish. His loyalty preserved the script's raw edge, including its controversial title change. Peoples hated the renaming to Unforgiven, fearing it was too vague, but Eastwood knew it captured the film's essence. It wasn't about redemption. It was about permanent scars, sins that could never be washed away. By keeping the script intact, Eastwood delivered not a Western fantasy, but a grim elegy. The near rewrite could have turned it into just another genre flick. Instead, it became a masterpiece that forced audiences to stare violence in the face. Eastwood's directing crew worked in silence. On most film sets, you hear constant chatter, assistant directors barking, crew calling cues, and directors yelling instructions. On Unforgiven, silence reigned. Eastwood ran his set like a monastery. No shouting, no chaos, just quiet professionalism. He banned loud clapping of the slate, replacing it with a soft hand signal. Crew members whispered instructions, and actors performed in a cocoon of calm. Gene Hackman admitted he found it unsettling at first. You'd finish a scene and wonder if it even worked, because Clint just nodded. But that quiet created focus. Performers fell into character without distraction, and the mood seeped into the film's DNA. The silence wasn't just a quirk, it mirrored the story's atmosphere, tense, haunted, and subdued. By the end of production, even the most skeptical crew members admitted they'd never been on a set so eerily calm, yet so fiercely productive. The gun props were painstakingly researched. Clint Eastwood wasn't satisfied with Hollywood's shiny, inaccurate cowboy guns. For Unforgiven, he insisted on weapons that reflected the 1880s with brutal accuracy. The Colt revolvers, Winchester rifles, and shotguns weren't polished showpieces. They were battered, dirty, and sometimes unreliable. Eastwood even had the props weighted to feel as heavy as the real weapons. Actors practiced reloading until it felt clumsy and time-consuming, because that's how it would have been. When William Money struggles to keep steady as he raises his shotgun in the saloon, that weight isn't performance, it's physical truth. The authenticity stripped away the glamour of the Old West gunfight. Guns weren't magical extensions of heroes. They were clunky, devastating tools of death. That choice reminded audiences that violence wasn't a dance. It was slow, heavy, and final. Eastwood's obsession with detail made sure every trigger pull carried consequence. The film almost didn't get released wide. Believe it or not, Warner Brothers initially considered giving Unforgiven only a limited release. The Western genre was considered dead by 1992, and executives doubted audiences cared for grim, revisionist stories. They worried it would flop outside of critics' circles. But when early screenings sparked electric word of mouth, the strategy shifted. Suddenly, Warner Brothers poured money into a nationwide rollout. The gamble paid off. Unforgiven earned over $150 million worldwide and swept the Oscars. What began as a potential niche release exploded into a cultural event. The hesitation nearly buried it, but Eastwood's faith and the audience's hunger for something raw saved the film from obscurity. It wasn't just released, it was unleashed, changing how Hollywood viewed Westerns forever. Eastwood kept the script in his vault of final films. The most startling truth? Unforgiven wasn't the only script Clint Eastwood tucked away for decades. He maintained what he called a vault, a collection of scripts he vowed to make only when he was the right age. Unforgiven was the crown jewel, but not the only treasure. The vault represented Eastwood's patience, his refusal to rush a story before its time. For him, Unforgiven wasn't just another movie. It was a farewell to the genre that made him a star, filmed exactly when it mattered most. Audiences thought they were seeing just another Clint Western. In reality, they were witnessing the opening of a vault that had been locked for years. That secret reshaped how fans viewed not just Unforgiven, but Eastwood's entire career, a man who played the long game and won. Unforgiven wasn't just a Western, it was a reckoning, a meditation on age, violence, and consequence. Behind the camera, it was just as brutal. Storms, clashes, studio battles, and the quiet authority of a director who refused to compromise. In the end, it shattered the myths of the West and left audiences with truths they couldn't shake. If you want more secrets from Hollywood's most daring productions, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us for the next deep dive. Because, as Eastwood proved, the real stories often hide behind the quietest doors.